Let me try that again. Welcome to Shelter in Solidarity, a deep dive with artists and activists during this ongoing COVID pandemic. We are into our second year of this pandemic era program, and we are glad to have you all with us this evening for an emergency show that we pulled together in the last week on the topic of the crisis in the Caribbean, building solidarity with Cuba and Haiti from the belly of the beast. I'm your host, Joe Ramsey, Zoomcasting with you and Facebook live streaming from Dorchester, Massachusetts on the south side of Boston. And I'm very pleased to be bringing to you today three terrific speakers, which I will introduce in a moment, each of whom I believe can give us historical and contemporary political perspective on events unfolding in Haiti and Cuba, as well as specifically the question of how we in the United States, those committed to anti-imperialism and to global liberation, can and must relate to this moment in the most effective and strategic way possible. We will be, just to frame today's discussion just a bit, I'm assuming that everyone on this call, and we have a nice 60 people with us live here on Zoom alone, which is great. People have been following the situation. I'm not going to try to sum it up quickly right now. I'm going to kick things to our speakers momentarily. But first, I will just say this, from the blurb for our event. Makers of two of the world's most consequential revolutions, the people of Cuba and Haiti have paid the price for attempting to set forth a freer and more just world. With forced reverse reparations, sanctions, invasions, and constant threats and attempts at regime change of one sort or another. By July 2021, in diverse ways, these matters have come to a head in both countries. With our conversation today, we will try to come to terms with the complex responses of both peoples while keeping a focus on what we have to do, we as in primarily, but not exclusively, activists in the heart of the empire. Our guests are longtime organizers, scholars, and activists, each challenging U.S. imperialism and white supremacy and laying the basis for challenging that power in the United States and beyond. I want to welcome our guests. First, we will have Vijay Prashad. Vijay, it's great to have you with us here on Zoom. It's good to hear you, and then we can see you when we hear you. Vijay, great to have you with us.
Nice to be with you. Okay. So,
Vijay, yes. Let me just introduce you briefly. Vijay is a historian, journalist, commentator, and widely published author of more than 20 books. He is the executive director of Tricontinental Institute for Social Research, the chief editor of Left World Books, and the chief correspondent for A Globetrotter, a project of the Independent News Institute. Thank you, Vijay, for being here. I know you need no introduction for many on this call. Our next speaker will be Moise St. Louis, Dr. Moise St. Louis. Moise, are you there?
I am.
It's great to see you and hear you, Moise. Moise St. Louis, PhD, has taught both nationally and internationally, published on various articles and opinion pieces, including democracy and democratic consolidation in Haiti. He is also a poet. He's currently working on a book on the Haitian state formation. I really look forward to hearing more about that. After, in fact, we'll hear from Vijay and our third guest, who will actually be speaking second, Ezili Dantor. Ezili Dantor is both a performance poet and playwright, as well as activist. She is the author, performer of the one-woman performance series, Red, Black, and Moonlight. She's a human rights lawyer, cultural and political activist, and a founder and president of Ezili's Haitian Lawyers Leadership Network. And I really appreciate she runs a terrific anti-imperialist Haiti listserv, which has been a resource to so many of us. Ezili, thank you for joining us this evening.
Honor and respect.
Great. So Vijay, now back to you. I know you wanted to jump right in with good cause. I want to kick it to you to just kind of lay out the framework. I know you study and write about and advocate on issues of imperialism globally, but obviously you have been focusing on the Caribbean lately. I understand you're planning to lay out a little framework for understanding the situation in Cuba, the immediate events, the relevant history, and the political framework that you think folks need to be bringing to this situation. So please take it away, Vijay. We've asked each of our speakers to go for about 7 to 8 minutes, and then always around the hour mark, we will bring in our live audience. That's one of the things about Shelter in Solidarity. So you're muted now, but if you do have a question or comment you'd like to prepare to make, please indicate in the chat box, and our producing team will make sure to get as many voices as we can around the hour mark. All right, Vijay, take it away.
Okay, it's great to be with you guys. Really appreciate people taking interest in this issue. the issue of two small islands in the Caribbean. Let's be frank about it. And one of them just a part of an island. Yet countries around the world take interest in it for reasons that I hope to be able to explore. On the 12th of July, Joe Biden released a statement on the White House website where he said, "We stand with the people of Cuba." We stand with the people of Cuba. This is extraordinary. President Joe Biden, we stand with the people of Cuba. More accurate to say, we stand on the neck of the people of Cuba. More accurate to say that. Because the United States, which occasionally fulminates in the name of democracy and human rights and things like that, has been attempting to suffocate Cuba since 1959, and let's be clear, suffocate Haiti since 1804. The United States and France never gave the Haitians, who conducted the first major modern revolution, never gave the Haitians a break, never. Collected indemnities. Chase Manhattan collected indemnities till 1947. Indemnities for what? Indemnities for the idea that people who had freed themselves have to somehow they have to pay for their own bodies. They have to pay who? They have to pay banks. They have to pay their French owners, as it were, and so on. And then when the Cuban people liberate themselves in 1959, they have to suffer a medieval blockage, because how dare they attempt to create their own existence? How dare Haiti and Cuba have sovereignty? You see, the one coin that people from places like Haiti and Cuba should not ever dare to exercise, which is their own sovereignty. Therefore, Haiti, think about this. Aristide twice couped, twice. That's extraordinary. The same person couped twice. In Cuba, the attempt to assassinate Fidel Castro, I don't know what the final number was before dear Fidel Castro died of natural causes. But the attempt to assassinate him, then the Bay of Pigs invasion. For Biden to say we stand with the people of Cuba beggars belief. If people accept that the United States has a benevolent policy on any of these matters, you just don't understand your own history. It's shameful for people in the United States to accept statements like that without pushing back. It's shameful because it completely obliterates 6+ decades of violent policy against the Cuban people. Violent policy. Cuba is a country of 11 million people, less than the population of New York City. Why doesn't the United States... Excuse me? What? Okay.
Thanks, Vijay. Keep going. Sorry, we had a little hiccup there. Please continue.
That's okay. I was just saying that, why can't the United States government and the US population let a country of merely 11 million people exercise its own sovereignty and build its own project and build its own understanding of how it wants to live in the world? Why not? No, it has to be punished. US policy is vindictive. US policy is cruel. It's cruel. This blockade is cruel and vindictive, and it's inhumane. And not only that, Donald Trump, on top of the normal suffocation of Cuba, put 243 what are known as coercive measures against Cuba. In addition to the normal blockade against Cuba, 243 coercive measures were placed by the Trump administration against the Cuban people. And guess what Biden did? In October, he said that yes, we're going to return to the Obama standard. Yes, we're going to reconsider the Trump policy. And then his spokesperson, Jen Psaki, says, well, we're not really thinking right now of discussing the Cuba policy. Meanwhile, today a story leaked that Biden is going to very soon, and maybe already has, personally sanctioned members of the Cuban government. So much for being a liberal, democratic, whatever false words we use to describe the Democratic Party. They are the party of war as much as the Republican Party. There is only one political party in the mainstream in the United States. It's the party of war. If you think from the standpoint of Cuba, Venezuela, or in most of the African continent, which has just seen a major military exercise run by the US in Morocco, in Nigeria, and Tunisia called African Lion, from the standpoint of governments and peoples around the world, there is no difference who's sitting in the White House. This is one policy. And certainly when it comes to Haiti, when it comes to Cuba, I don't see the difference. I know liberals like to, split hairs and say, well, they are better on this and that, maybe in domestic policy. Certainly not when it comes to the exercise of imperialism. Now, what happened on the 11th of July? Well, firstly, we need to understand what hybrid war is. The United States has been prosecuting an information war, diplomatic war, cultural war, a war on many fronts against Venezuela, against Cuba, against Iran, against about 35 countries in the world. What's interesting is, yes, you have these harsh sanctions, you have a pandemic, you have Cuba's reliance on tourism, a consequence of the collapse of the Soviet Union, a consequence of decisions made during the special period. Like many developing countries, there are very few arrows in the quiver for a country, very few ways of basically collecting capital. One of them is through tourism. It helps foreign exchange come in. It helps with your external debt situation. Finance Minister of Cuba was recently in Paris, meeting the Paris Club, trying to get a break on Cuba's external debt, not able to get a good enough break. You have a tourism problem, you have an external debt problem, you have the pandemic. Meanwhile, the Cuban government, right through this pandemic, has provided healthcare without charge and has provided relief for everybody who is struggling. Limited relief because it's a developing country, it's a poor country, but everybody is getting relief. It's cost over $2 billion for the Cuban people, for the Cuban government to support the population. Meanwhile, the United States, through its blockade, is costing the Cuban people about $5 billion. You stand with the Cuban people. Certainly, if you stand with the Cuban people, stop the blockade now. At least withdraw the 243 coercive measures. Not a chance of that. In the morning of July 11th, there were protests in Cuba. Protests saying there's nothing on the shelves. We need something. As soon as news of protests in San Antonio de los Baños came in Havana, Miguel Díaz-Canel, the president of Cuba, got into his car and drove to that town. He drove to San Antonio de los Baños, got out of his car, walked amongst the people and said, what's going on? Let me ask you a question, friends. We stand with the Cuban people. When is the last time a US president has got onto a plane or a car, gone to St. Louis, gone to Los Angeles, gone to a place in Minneapolis when George Floyd was killed? Which US president has walked on the street amongst the people and said, what's your problem? What's happening? Tell me, I've come to listen to you. None of them. Díaz-Canel was on the street by the afternoon of July 11th. He gave a statement saying, everybody come on the street. We need to exercise our defense of the Cuban Revolution because people in Miami are mischievously saying these are anti-government, anti-revolution protests. Tens of thousands of people took to the street across Cuba, especially in Havana. The Malecon was filled with people. They came there with Cuban flags, with flags of the July 26th movement and so on. Strikingly, the Western press took photographs of those rallies around the revolution to say that there are protests against the revolution. It's very interesting, and nobody calls, these press outlets don't apologize for that so-called, let's call it what it is, fake news. It's the next day, on the 12th of July, the next day after all this, that Biden releases the statement, and they tried to make this suggestion through this hashtag, which was retweeted every 5 seconds in Miami, in Washington, D.C., but not on the Cuban island. There is this immense attack on Cuba, ideological, but it's not going to work because the Cuban people, despite the incredible hardship they face, and the hardship is incredible, just like the Venezuelan people are not going to bend. They are not going to allow a regime change because they know the United States doesn't want to advance Cuba to freedom. The United States wants to go back to the 31st of December 1958. The United States wants to go back to making Cuba a gangster's paradise. Nobody wants that. They want to advance forward. They want to improve conditions on the island, not return to the 31st of December 1958. When Biden says we stand with the Cuban people, what they mean is the Cuban oligarchies of December 31st, 1958, who now live in Miami, they stand with them. They don't stand with the Cuban people who live in Cuba and have been fighting for more than 60 years to build their sovereign process.
Thank you, Vijay. I mean, very powerfully laid out. And I think, I mean, so much to pick up
Yeah,
on
that,
there.
hold on.
But, and we just ask all our
Yeah,
audience
it's
members
good.
to
It's
please
back like
keep
it's supposed to be.
muted until we get to the Q&A section. I know that's a thing with live discussion. But I mean, you ask a question almost as a rhetorical question, but I hope we can return to it maybe after we hear from our other guests as not only a rhetorical question. Why can't the U.S.
Yeah.
allow Cuba to live? Right? Why can't the sorry, getting interrupted here. Why can't the U.S. allow Cuba to live? What is it that drives the U.S. ruling class, not only the kind of expats, the reactionary expats in southern Florida, but the U.S. ruling class in general to be so stuck on Cuba, as you point out, a nation of only 11 million people, smaller than New York City. We're going to move now to Ezili, Dantor, and shift the focus a little bit, though connections between the two islands are more than welcome. Ezili, Dantor, could you please walk us through your understanding of what's been unfolding in Haiti and how the history of Haiti and the history of United States intervention in Haiti kind of informs your understanding of this moment? We'll move to Moise after that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Honor and respect. I greet all of my people from the Ezili network who are here. And thank you, Joe Ramsey. So I run the Free Haiti movement, and everything you're reading in the news about Haiti, as the previous speaker says, most of it is fake news because it pictures the United States as a neutral party who has no role and where Haiti is today, which is all untrue. Everything you're seeing in Haiti, the reason we are so poor, the reason why this latest puppet was assassinated, all has to do with the one thing in history that we did. This is retribution. Every American policy, Western European policy towards Haiti is retribution because we got rid of slavery. That's all you have to know really about the Haitian Revolution. I don't want to go too much into the Haitian Revolution only because I do it all of the time. All of you can just go into my website and see it, but understand and know that for us, Haitian, the West is one evil with two faces. They play hero and villain. They will destroy your country and then they want to come in and bring back order. So we are about taking down the system, the profit over people system. We are not about being a brothel, as your previous guest has said, right? Tourism is about being a brothel for the northern countries, and your country is just a prop. So Haitian, we are 13 million people. We are the most populous in the Caribbean, of the Caribbean nations. Jovenel Moise, the president that was just assassinated, was a dictator, a puppet of the US core group. The core group are the enemies of Haiti, and they are made up of, these are our enemies: the United States, France, Canada, Germany, Spain, Brazil, the European Union, the OAS, and the UN. They have come as one fist. Haiti is the only place in the world where a confederate group of diplomats have gotten together. They're the ones that run Haiti. They're the ones that run our elections. I was born in Haiti, and I first went back as the lawyer for the first democratically elected Haitian president, Jean-Bertrand Aristide, back in 1994. The United States does not want us to be sovereign. They create essentially, they leave us in debt, dependency, and domination. As your previous guest was saying, in terms of Cuba, they do everything to steal our resources. Haiti is rich in resources. I talk all the time about our mountains of iridium, the asteroid that fell into Haiti something like 66 million years ago. We are 1 billion years old. We have a strategic interest at the United States. We are in the Windward Passage across from Guantanamo Bay. You know, that's Cuba. So we're right across from there. Where below us is Venezuela. So Haiti is right in the middle between, if you want to know what the strategic interest is, why the United States has built its largest embassy in the Western Hemisphere in Haiti, then you must understand that what we did in the Haitian Revolution so scares white supreme body people with the idea that they are superior, that they have to keep us contained. And so their policy for 217 years now has been a policy of containment. They have contained us through various ways. We are the laboratory. And I'd like to spend the few minutes I have to tell you that I have a piece about this particular situation. So because we may not have enough time for me to go into all the details and sort of explode the spectacle that you're seeing right now in the media, right? Everybody is salivating off of, in terms of the media and the corporatocracy, they're salivating off of this shock of the assassination, and this feeds their psyche, it feeds something, right? Our pain feeds these people. So that's what's going on. So they're showing you as if somehow this assassin that just got assassinated is a tragic thing. And let me just say first, okay, it's not tragic for us, for the victims. He was working on behalf of the core group. I told you who they were, okay? And so the question is, why is the United States so interested in Haiti that they keep us in this dependency? They get rid of they give us fake democracy, right? So the democracy they give us, when Aristide, for instance, had the first democratically elected person, about 75% of the voting public voted. Today, the core group has destroyed our institutions so much that they have fake democracy, and only less than 15% of the people voting votes, right, to put in their fake Jovenel Moise. And they put him in after the earthquake, when we were 310,000 people had died in 33 seconds. So I have a piece called "The Western Barbarians and the Role of Russia, Turkey, Venezuela May Have Played in Hastening Jovenel Moise's Assassination." The reason I want to go there is because I think that this picture is never going to be seen by anyone, because the United States sells this idea that Haiti is so small and so incompetent and so violent that they have no resources, that they have no interest. I'm going to show you Haiti's interest and why it's so important. As I said, the United States built its largest embassy and the fourth largest embassy in the world in Haiti. And that's after major spaces that it has an interest in. So Jovenel Moise was a ballot box dictator imposed on Haiti, like Michel Martelly, the previous ballot box dictator, just like the Duvaliers, okay? And in this piece, which you can find on ezili.com, I examined the role of Russia, Turkey, and Venezuela. And so essentially they put this man in office. And since he came in office, the people of Haiti has been on the streets saying, we don't want drug dealers, kidnappers, money launderers as our president. As you know, the CIA, the DEA, all of these alphabet letter people, they go to your country and they find the criminal element, and they put those criminal elements in office so that they can control them. That is the template. So this guy, Jovenel Moise, before he became a president, he was an indicted money laundering person. Now, as you see, they're telling you that and him and the previous guy, Michel Martelly, their party is called PHTK. They use, because before them, we had 13 years of direct UN occupation. The United States have occupied Haiti twice. I mean, actually, they've been occupying us since 1915, when they left behind their military forces. So when you see the Haitian police, they are US assets trained by the United States. Before this assassination, they said that Haiti had a gang problem and this Haitian police couldn't do anything about it. Today, you see the Haitian police are arresting these mercenaries. This is the same police that 3 months, for the last 3 months, could not do anything when thousands upon thousands of market women and families were displaced. So they use these forces to displace people that are on the shorelines in the what they call the slum areas, so that they can give it to the oligarchy. And who are the oligarchies in Haiti? They are from the Middle East. They are Syrians, Lebanese, and Israelis. The biggest billionaire in the Caribbean are Vijay and the Mur family. There is nothing that happens in Haiti, including this assassination, without these mafia families and the United States and the Mossad knowing about it. Before he left office, Michel Martelly, who was put in under Obama, Biden, and Mrs. Clinton, he left. He gave an Israeli company to control our borders, land, air, and sea, called Heisel. You will not find this anywhere anywhere. No one's going to tell you this. So the question is, if the United States has the biggest embassy in the Western Hemisphere in Haiti, and you're going to mean to tell me that 9 heavily armed Nissan patrol cars went in the middle of the night in a place that has no electricity, went up the mountain to do this to their puppet, and they didn't see it? We don't really believe it. We see the show and we say, what would have been the motive for the United States to actually do this? Well, the people of Haiti fight back. We never stop fighting back, just like our ancestors before us. When the Haitian Revolution happened, not only did we get rid of direct colonialism, forced assimilation, the triangular trade. Today, the United States is very scared that if Haiti can rule itself, because it's right there in that strategic place where there's two people that are two nations that it doesn't have control over, Venezuela, that has the largest reserves of oil, and Cuba, that it's been trying to bring back. So Russia is in those waters. To understand what's going into Haiti, you have to understand the balance of power games that the Eurasian powers play. So about a month before he was killed, Jovenel Moise went to Turkey. Erdogan is as hated as Maduro. The United States, Erdogan is a NATO, Erdogan is the president of Turkey. This puppet president was trying to find allies because he saw that his term was about to be over. He was trying to do a referendum where he would either have more of another term, be able to have consecutive, in IT, you can't have consecutive terms. He was trying to amend the Constitution, but his masters were not really helping him do that. And also, he had presided over about 11 massacres. The biggest one people know is La Saline. Like I said, in the last 3 months, between 12 to 18,000 people were burnt down by his gangs. Where do those gangs get their weapons? From the Israelis. And who controls the ports and brings it in? The mafia families. You will never hear about this. So he probably, this is something you'll never hear, but he probably essentially pissed off his masters, which is the core group. By a month before he died, he went to Turkey. He met with Erdogan, who the United States hates because Turkey has bombed the opposition to al-Assad in Syria. And the United States obviously supports the opposition to al-Assad in Syria. They bring through immigration, let's say, folks in ISIS or Al-Qaeda to Haiti, and now they make up the oligarchs in Haiti. Those people are the ones that are always bringing coup d'etat in Haiti because they're not connected to the Haitian Revolution. The United States used them. You remember the Ira-Contra affair? So I wanted to bring something you'll never see. Because Colombia makes 70% of the world's cocaine, and it's a clientele of the United States. They wash that through Haiti to bring to Miami, and the intelligence agencies use that money and that profit, and they have their Middle Eastern oligarchs in Haiti use the ports to do all of that. The DEA is very, very involved with it. And then whatever the profits is, they take those profits and go do their wars against Syria. That's
Ezili,
what you need to know.
Ezili, no, I appreciate you flagging these issues that, you know, that are not being discussed in mainstream media. And I think, I mean, I do want to bring in Moise in a moment, but I do want to flag a couple points that you made that I think really are worth highlighting. And I know we have some folks raising questions that we can hopefully get to later in the discussion. Victor Wallace, I see you there in the chat box, and others. But I mean, a couple points that I think are worth reiterating. One is, I mean, you're right, absolutely, Ezili, that like the way Haiti tends to be represented in Western and US media is this place that is just endless poverty and chaos and criminality, and, you know. But I mean, it's very important for us to return to consciousness the history of the immense wealth of Haiti, past and present, right? I mean, there was more wealth extracted from this single colony of Saint-Domingue under French rule, right, than all 13 American colonies that we, were supposed to sing the praises of on July 4th, right? I mean, this is known to people who study Haiti, but it's not known well enough that the historic extraction of wealth from the land, sweat, and blood of the Haitian people, and not to mention the indigenous who occupied previously and were largely but not completely wiped out, needs to be restored. And I think it's very important. You're reminding us, also raising important questions. Why does the U.S. have the largest embassy in the Western Hemisphere there? What is the material wealth there that can be that others are planning to extract, in addition to the labor, that the cheap and exploited labor of Haitians? And the other point you make is the international connection. I mean, and here I want to kick it to Moise, but I mean, you point out, I think, building on Vijay's presentation, the threat, if there was an independent Haiti pursuing its own sovereignty, and Cuba, that the kind of problem that would pose for the U.S. empire. And that is perhaps one of the reasons the U.S. has been so aggressive in intervening in Haiti and Cuba as well. Also, the Venezuelan connection. I mean, my understanding that the most recent rounds, the last couple of years of massive protest, had everything to do with U.S. pressure on Venezuela, which limited the kind of oil subsidies, which made the Venezuelan state kind of curtail its support for the Haitian state, which then forced the Haitian state, right, to kind of play with neoliberal games and jack up, reduce its gas subsidy and make, I think my understanding is gasoline twice as expensive as it was, resulting in massive protests and desperation among a people that's dependent on moving about the island. So I just want to thank you for those connections you make. And Moise, there's a lot on the table, but let's go to Dr. Moise St. Louis just to build on Ezili Dantor's presentation, and perhaps also to tie things back to Cuba as well, which I understand you're prepared to do. Moise.
Yes, indeed. Thanks everyone for coming. Let me just say I'm here because my ancestors fought the good fight. And so I owe them a lot to do, indeed, to be here. And so I want to center them in this conversation. So I want to really start the conversation by debunking some things so we can really adjust the context of Haiti and Cuba and the greater challenge of people trying to find or establish or fight for self-determination within a global system based on exploitation and dependence and indebtedness, right? And so it's that context that I want to tie in the two presentations that have been made. The first thing I want to debunk is that the Haitians, since their independence, has never been able to organize a successful state, right? And we hear that over and over again, that they destroyed the pearl of the Caribbean that was under the French, and they burned down everything, and as such have not been able to reconstruct a state and a nation that is successful. And there are a few assumptions to that, right? That one is that they had no, they were the barbarians from Africa and had no sense of organization. And two, that the French system was legitimate and successful based on human trafficking and enslavement, right? But the history is different. when the Haitians fought their independence, they created a state. In fact, they created a constitution that gave the right to everybody in a system that only gave the right to the few, right? So if you compare the American Revolution, it only allows right for successful white men, white elites who wanted to replace the king. If you look at the French Revolution before that, they only really gave right to French citizens, and women and others did not have that right. The Haitians gave the right universally to everyone. And they did so because they came from societies, organized societies and empires that gave the right to everybody, right? They were informed by African history and African institutions, and so forth, and by the fact that men and women fought for their independence. And so there was equality, a notion of equality amongst the Haitians that allowed them to establish a state in a global system where people like them were trafficked and enslaved, in a global system, in the economic system that is antithetical to their independence, right? To their self-determination, right? And so what you find is in the 20 years before indemnity was imposed, nations competed with each other to access Haitian ports, right? The Haitian state was able to be organized, centralized, and its power was based on the interdependence between the people and the nation and then the state. That the state was centered around their protection and their protection from invasion and reoccupation and re-enslavement. And the state was able to check the excesses of the different interest group that made up the nation, right? So it was not just an economically successful state, it was an institutionally successful state. It was able to hold its own on the global stage, so much so that countries not only competed for it, but countries like France flew under different flags to be able to access its ports, right? So the Haitian impoverishment that you hear is antithetical to the actuality of the Haitian state. So what happens and why are we here, right? Often we don't think about the Haitian state and many states in Latin America and the Caribbean as captured states, right? What we would often say called neo-colonial, dependent, indebted states, right? Their role is to feed into a quasi-state slave system, right? Exploitative, dominated, where the resources and manpower continues to go outward rather than centered for the benefit of the people, right? And so the indemnity did exactly that, right? It reimposed control over the nation, supported by all the major powers. It prevented the nation from using the resources of the nation to benefit its population. Like education within the population was extensive, right? The commitment to educate the population, to invest in the population was extensive. And the indemnity undermined the capacity of the state to use those resources and its leaders to safeguard and benefit its population. Such that, as I was doing research, one of the things that became clear is that once that was imposed, the Haitians had to borrow money. Well, the French wrote a report, actually. And their point was the Haitians, therefore, had to borrow money from France to pay France, right? So, on them were imposed this notion that only France can benefit from their resources in exportation, right? So the French not only control the resources, but they control the price of those resources. So that the Haitian state therefore became dependent, and indebted for its freedom, right? So we have to understand that a captured state. So what you see in Haitian history is an attempt by the population, the populace who saw that their state was captured, who have an expectation and still do that the state should be responsive to their needs and their interests, who kept challenging to reorient the state towards their needs and their interests, right? And so what often is talk about Haitian instability has been historically pressure from the population to reorient the captured state to be an independent and sovereign state that can serve their interests. The 1915 invasion consolidated that state, confiscated. Until then, Haitians resisted. So it was a hybrid dependent state. The invasion consolidated that dependence and killed about 50,000 of the Haitian populace in the north, which was the center of resistance, and therefore gave the state to a core elite that would help it maintain control, and does one thing that it did throughout the Caribbean. It established a new military that was able to help the new elite manage interests and preserve interests, right? So if you look at Nicaragua, it did that in Nicaragua with Somoza, it did that in Cuba with Batista and its help, right? And so these states, right, became captured states whose resources went an implementation of the Monroe Doctrine, if you will, right? Resources went to feed the external interests rather than the population. And so it wasn't until, and I'm doing a quick historical elaboration so we can get to now, because context, I think, is very important.
Absolutely, it's great.
It wasn't until, so the military that was in Haiti post-occupation was an occupation military. And attempts to regulate that military took place under Papa Doc. Papa Doc had a policy. That policy was internal control, external dependence, right? He wanted to control the internal dynamics in the country, but he understood that he could not control the excesses of foreign powers, right? And so the Maquis was a way to balance the power of the military that was imposed on the nation.
These are the
Right? Often Haitian scholars don't do a good job problematizing the competition for power that existed in the country and attempts to redirect the state, right? So one of the major things that he did is reorient at least the state towards the populace, in the sense that the middle class, the Black middle class grew, the state institutions got centralized, industries who were able to support the internal dynamic of the state were established. This was betrayed by his son, who gave away and to neoliberal pressure and loosened the structure of the state that impoverished the population. So a few things happened, right? Before, a few things happened. He started, so even when people talk about the poverty of the Haitian state, the Haitian farmers or peasantry, if you will, was the most successful and richest in the Western Hemisphere. No one talks about that. And the reason why they were, it's because they own their own land. And they own their own land because at the time, at the dawn of the Haitian Revolution, that was an expectation that people had the right to land. People who had fought for their freedom had the right to land, right? And so because of that, they were able to produce their resources. And at the dawn of democracy in the country, the country was exporting cement, the country was exporting coffee, the country was producing enough rice to feed its population and exporting rice. The country was self-reliant in terms of its capacity to feed itself and could also employ a great cross-section of the population. So what happens? The country became democratic. Well, what happens when the country became democratic and it's a popular form of democracy? It's not an elite-based and implemented residual democracy, but it's a fully popularly supported democracy. Well, the population for once, we captured the state. Because in a democracy, they really believe that democracy will make the state more responsive to their needs. And so they voted, 90% of the population voted.
For Aristide and Lavalas.
For Aristide,
right?
Okay. Because they believe democracy and their participation in it would create a state that was responsive to their needs. And in fact, they were insistent on that. And the first coup did not prevent them from that insistence. And Aristide had to return, even with the military that was supported by the CIA. And that fact is well established. That was killing people. Now why that was important? So the people were able to re-elect their president and by over 90% of the vote. People who believe in democracy and who believe in the recapturing and reorienting of their nation towards their needs. And so the coup happened to undermine. So a couple of things happened. A coup, one. Second, I want you to understand this concept, right? Suffering as a foreign policy strategy by the United States. Right? Suffering as a foreign policy by the United States. Now, why do I say that? When Madeleine Albright was asked, why are the people in Iraq dying because of the embargo put on medicine for the population? She said, let them die.
She said, is it worth it? She said, she
right. So the point,
yes, 300,000 dead children. Yes, it's worth it.
Yes, it's worth it. So the point, right? You have to see suffering as a foreign policy strategy. If the population wants democracy so much, we have to make democracy irrelevant and painful to them so that they think twice about it, right? So two things happen. The undermining of the Haitian state. You block every resources, you compel them to privatize those resources, and you close those resources that used to employ the population. You destroy their food reliance by flooding cheap rice in the country and destroy the farmers' ability to feed themselves and the population, right? So you destroy food production in the country. You destroy all the major institutions in the country. And why did they do that? Because Aristide did one thing that was a very significant thing. It disbanded the military that was organized to support external interests. What that meant is that the elites of the nation had to negotiate with the interests of the population to find a common ground. And to resolve that, so the elites had no choice. But so to resolve that, the US wanted the status quo, brought in the international forces as a substitute for the military that was imposed on the nation, right? So you have to then understand this kind of dependence and indebtedness that was imposed to indemnity, the undermining of the Haitian state and its capacity to serve its population, the removal of the status quo that brought the UN forces in the nation, and therefore the imposition of a system that has allowed the population to really stop participating in the democratic process. Now, why do I say that? Whereas in the 1990s and early 2000, 90% participated. When Jovenel was elected, 17.3% participated and 9.3% voted for. If my participation in democracy does not create a state that is responsive to my need, I'm going to stop participating. So when I was doing research in the country, that is exactly what the people said. Right? That there is no reason for me to participate if someone's going to decide who's going to be the government and what kind of support the government can offer or not offer to me, right? And so not only is the state undermined by flooding NGOs in the country, the UN forces by imposing the status quo, but all the major institutions that used to employ the populations have been privatized and closed. So the imposition of Martelly on the nation came out. He was the third candidate who was not supposed to continue, and it was compelled to be continued by the US and the OAS. It was an imposed government. And the result of that is that he gave control of the exploitation of gold. Haiti has $21 billion deposited in gold to Clinton's half-brother and Canadian and French exploratory institutions. That is why the people revolted and forced him to give up power early, and why Jovenel came into office under protest. But he was duly elected by a small population. Right. Now I'm coming to a conclusion.
Okay, great, Moise. We just want to make sure we have a chance to responses.
Jovenel, in many ways, came into office dependent and paid for by Western forces, the core group, and the US government and the elites. But something happens in Jovenel. He wanted to reestablish the state. He wanted to reestablish the institutions of the state. And the goal of the elite was to make the country ungovernable so that he would not be able to check the excesses of the elites, right? And that his insistence on changing the internal status quo and on challenging the US resulted in his death, right? And that death has to be seen within a context of a captured state, right? If a state is able to find its way to independence, as the Cubans did, as the Venezuelans did, the foreign policy based on suffering is designed to compel its population to overthrow the very institutions and state capable of supporting their needs, right? And so Haiti finds itself at an impasse. Does it continue to fight to reorient the state to support its interests? Does the population continue to fight to reorient the state to support its interests? And do leaders who really want to do that want to take the risk of fighting for self-determination for the country if the end result is that level of violence on the president's family and the president itself, right? And so you have to see the Cubans and the embargo. The Cubans were able to find their self-determination and reorient the state towards their population. That offset the international order. The Venezuelans were able to do the same thing with Chavez and reorient the resources to serve their population. The Haitians have been fighting since the indemnity, especially since the democratic movement, to reorient the population, the state towards meeting the needs of the population, and at great cost, right? So on the left, I think we have to be thinking, how do we support countries who's fighting the international order to be able to capture their resources to support their population? And how do we see ourselves living in the very United States within the context of dependence and indebtedness? That the more in debt you are, the less power you have, the more control, and the less you are likely to resist the status quo and the system in place. So your reality in many ways reflect the realities of the Cubans and the Venezuelans and the Haitians trying Cuba successfully at great cost, the Venezuelan at great cost to suffering, and we see it every day, and the Haitians so far unsuccessful, though trying very hard to see how they can reorient their state to meet their needs. But Haiti is a captured state, and we have to see it within that context.
Yeah, Moise, thank you so much for that, laying that out. I know we went a little long, but I think it was very rich, and I think a very important historical perspective for folks to be taking in. I mean, there's much to uplift from there, and I want to go back for one more round from our other speakers before we welcome our live audience into the conversation, and also hear from our co-producer Kira Mudiar some action items that we've assembled that people can highlight in terms of and engage directly in terms of solidarity work. But I mean, you really, and I mean, kicking this maybe back to Vijay and just in the order, and then to Ezili. I mean, Moise, you really have illuminated the way in which, the question of democracy in a place like Haiti, right? I mean, one thing I hear from your talk is just the concerted effort by the United States and imperial powers and pressures and capitalist interests to try to erode and evacuate the notion of democracy, of any kind of mass participation, right? It's not that, the problem wasn't that Haiti didn't have enough democracy. It had too much, right, from the standpoint of the elites. And so you now have this very cynical effort of trying to maintain a facade of democracy while sending every kind of message, whether it's assassinating a president that maybe had a thought about trying to restore the state, even though he was deeply compromised by his institutional affiliations with this imperial project and the groups that he's associated with, or it's in multiple coups against Aristide and the assassination of hundreds, thousands of Lavalas activists, but this kind of evacuation of any kind of actual mass popular meaning of democracy. And debt seems to be part of that. Of course, military interventions part of that. I kind of want to kick it back to Vijay here and give you the freedom of movement on this question as you want. But what do you think this moment is showing us about democracy? The myth of democracy. I mean, Moise started by debunking. I wonder if you might like to step into debunking some of the problems we see, whether in U.S. culture more broadly, on the left in particular, about how we understand democracy, and also Moise has flagged, and Ezili as well, this issue of debt, and the way debt compromises democracy, the way that the economic realm kind of undermines the political sphere. There's a lot on the table, Vijay, but what stands out to you?
Well, look, democracy, it's a curiosity. I mean, the United States cannot be used as an exemplar against which you measure other countries. Frankly, I think that's ridiculous. The United States is not a democracy. It's bought and paid for by big money, especially after that Supreme Court decision about any amount of money goes in the democratic process. I know it has a name, whatever that's called. What's that court case called?
The people, yes, it's
whatever it is.
Citizens United.
Citizens United, right, correct. Right. After the fact that today Joe Biden, I think he was where was he? In Cincinnati, or where was he? Somewhere or the other. He basically said that he is unwilling to do a full-scale fight to defend voting rights in the United States. I mean, this is a country where the Supreme Court decided to invalidate the Voting Rights Act, which basically is an attempt to stem the racist rot in the political system of the United States, a system demonstratively created as a slave society. What are we talking about? These loose comments about, authoritarian China, authoritarian so and so. I mean, this is a dictatorship of capital. Let's call it what it is. It's a dictatorship of capital. Bernie Sanders ran a fair and square campaign, but the whole oligarchy basically gets behind an attempt to derail him. I'm spending time on this, Joe, because I think it's quite annoying to talk about, well, let's have a look at this country or that country and judge whether they are democratic or not. If you've been to Cuba, you'll understand that it's a deeply decentralized society. I mean, I don't know. There are all kinds of elections in Cuba, but more than anything, there's the committees to defend the revolution. I mean, I was once there in the lead up to a hurricane coming in, and in a little town where I was, the committee took charge. They dismantled electric lines. They set the town up so that when the hurricane came through, they allowed it to go through, and then they just put the electricity back up. Look at Puerto Rico. I wrote an article about that called A Tale of Two Islands. Look at Puerto Rico. That's a democracy. They had no electricity for months on end. Total disregard from the United States government, so-called democracy. Let's look at how democracy functions. Who does it function for? This is a class question. This is not a question of abstract, whatever it is, constitutionalism. It's a class question. In the United States, there's a dictatorship of capital. You haven't actually overcome the realm of necessity in the United States. There are still people homeless, starving on the streets. I was in Los Angeles, saw homeless shelters all over the place. And yet we talk about, oh, well, in Cuba, they don't have democracy. What democracy? I just gave you an example. There was a protest. Miguel Diaz-Canel goes right onto the street and talks to people. I have never heard of an American president doing that, friends. Never heard of anybody doing that. What democracy? During Occupy, for instance, why didn't somebody just stroll down and talk to people? These are not people. And in any anti-war demonstration, these are peaceniks. They're not going to hurt you. Go and talk to them. Quite different from the January 6th protesters, who might have killed people, because those fellows are warnicks. They are not peaceniks. Nobody does that. This is not democratic. I mean, I've been to demonstrations in the United States, local demonstrations where local officials don't come out and talk to their constituents. Talk about direct democracy, So I think this is a very false attitude, this attitude that, oh, in the West, there's democracy and oh my God, there are authoritarians over there. I would like to just put this on the table. There's an edge of racism in this. It's the same racism that teaches people that when the United States bombs, it's for benevolent reasons. That, oh yes, let the US go and save the Libyan people. Do you remember that ghastly episode? So many liberals were on the side of Obama and Hillary Clinton saying, yes, let's go and bomb in Libya to save the Libyans from themselves. Good God, people, you're losing your minds if you defend something like that. Line up behind the authoritarians, you'll become, before you know it, like Christopher Hitchens. Serious warning. Don't become like Christopher Hitchens.
Yeah, a good warning for us all, at least on the left. There's, imperialism and racism can let you slide into real horrors, supporting horrors. Ezili, I want to go back to you for some comments on things that have been said or other things that you'd like to elaborate. There's a lot that's on the table here. And then briefly to Moise, though Moise, I do feel like you gave us a lot the first round, but I would like to hear your follow-up thought. And then we will bring in our live audience. We have almost 100 of you here on Zoom and others on Facebook. If you do, I just want to reiterate, we've said this in the chat box, but if you have a question or comment that you'd like to make out loud, not just in the chat box, which many of you have, please do write, at least stack something or write your question in all caps, or make some indication to me or one of our co-producers so that we can make sure to call on you. You can also raise your hand. We'll try to maybe take 3 or 4 questions at a time to give as many voices as we can. And we'll also bring in Kira Mudliar to share some action items that we've assembled for people on the call today who want to do something concretely in the spirit of solidarity. So to Ezili, briefly to Moise, and then to our live audience. Ezili, what stands out to you from the conversation you want to highlight? Make sure to unmute, Ezili. I believe you're muted.
I wanted to add that one of the other things that enraged the core group about Jovenel, besides the fact that they felt that he had gone above his pay grade by going to Turkey, was that for the first time the Russians 30 days before he was killed, 35 days before Jovenel was assassinated, Haiti got a Russian ambassador to Haiti. This is significant because, as you all have been talking about, the geopolitical importance of Haiti between Cuba and Venezuela. And the only reason they are able to use the resources of their country for themselves, or try to, is because of Russia, because they have a big gun. Well, Haiti doesn't have a big gun. And here is Jovenel looking for that big gun at the end. I think primarily for his own self, because he was an indicted drug money launderer. And apparently, though we don't know, one of the people talking say that they were supposed to be serving, this Colombian hit squad was said they weren't supposed to be there to kill him, but they were supposed to be serving a 2019 warrant for his arrest and to present him to the DEA. This has been done before when Guy Philippe, who they used as a death squad to take down Jean-Bertrand Aristide in 2004, it was also doing a lot of drugs. And they had the same guy, James Solange, who now is part of this squad, one of the Haitian Americans. He was an informant that apparently brought the Guy Philippe to the DEA at some point. And so maybe he thought he was doing the same thing. But what I want to say is that the message the United States is saying to us, what we see very clearly as in Free Haiti, is that the assassination is nothing more than a desperate message delivered by this enraged United States, with this woman, Michelle Sisson, as the ambassador, career ambassador, and Hélène Lalume, 38-year hit woman all over Africa, creating suffering for people of color everywhere. This core group, hit women, essentially what they want to say to us Haitians is that you can't find any allies. We won't let Russia, Turkey, or any of you won't let you have any kind of bilateral relationships or new opportunities for local progress and development through any of these enemies of ours: China, Venezuela, Cuba, Turkey, Iran, North Korea. And if you do, because all you're supposed to have is these weaponized charity, this orphanage where they come in and hurt our children sexually, this fake humanitarian aid, and this sort of democracy you're talking about. We at the Free Haiti spell it DEMOCK, mock, KKRACY, democracy, because it's just a charade. So they're just essentially, this is a message to those of us who are trying to find a way to get out of this domination. And to say, if you resist our total domination and our total corruption, our total plunder of your gold, which is $100 billion, our oil, which is at the head of Venezuelan oil, is in Haiti's waters, the iridium and all of that. If you receive that, then you will be shot. This is what they did to Jovenel Moise. They shot him 12 times, gouged out his eyes, broke his neck and arms and legs. That's the message here. And just to finish it up, Hélène Lalume, the US diplomat at the UN, essentially told Haitians after this happened to Jovenel, they just told us who the acting president is going to be. The Haitian people have nothing to do with it. They just put in, first they put in Claude Joseph, who is the de facto prime minister under Jovenel, who had been fired. And then when a Colombian paper said he was a suspect, they put in Ariel Henry. What people have to understand is that the Haitian people have nothing to do with what they're calling government in Haiti.
It's very powerful, right? I mean, we get this news headlines, New York Times. I just saw it today, right? Yeah, Henry he's going to be the president, but suddenly democracy doesn't seem to matter that much, right? It's just suddenly a few elites get together and say, oh, this guy that's been approved of by the West or whatever, by the right group, that's fine. I think democracy, putting the K in democracy, I think
M-O-C-K, yes.
Is right. Is a CK is a wise maneuver, a very, very appropriate. Moise, what stands out to you? I know there's a lot to be said here. We do want to bring in more voices, but I would love to hear a little follow-up from you. I mean, one thing I think you spoke to briefly here. I mean, what about the way forward? What about the points of hope? I know the Haitian, very longstanding progressive Haitian solidarity voice Kim Ives has pointed to this Jimmy Barbecue as a potential revolutionary of the lumpen proletariat in Haiti. I don't want to cordon you into speaking to Kim Ives directly, whose work I've learned a lot from over the years. But I mean, where do you see, if it's not this Henri, if it's not the group, if it's not these imposed, where do you see the way forward? And I don't want to cordon you in too much, but what can people in a place like the United States do to contribute to the struggle in Haiti, the true popular struggle for true sovereignty and true meaningful democracy, or meaningful revolutionary process, or at least a shift of power to the people?
Well, I'll respond briefly. I think you can do that by imposing your will on your government. I think if you want to change the dynamics in other countries and the imposition of the United States, then you have to be able to orient the decision making of your nation. And as long as you're unable to do that and you're not fully engaged in really shaping the national political scenes, both locally and nationally, right? Then the result is what we will have. And it is in this context, right? This state, they captured state, right? But they captured for a reason. There are limited resources, then there's high level of competition for those resources. The United States is in decline. It is facing its own perestroika internally, right? It is faltering and facing quite a level of internal pressures, right? Its ability to control those resources of the world will help it continue functioning the way it's functioning, and it will do everything to be able to control those resources, right? And so if you're unable to influence what the American government see as its interest, if you're not able to grasp control of the decision-making of the government and leave it to cooperation as it has been historically, small countries are doomed to suffering as a foreign policy strategy. And those who try to change the status quo will be killed the same way that Jovenel Moise was killed. The message is pretty clear. Independence is a threat. The asserting of sovereignty is a threat to the status quo and to American interests and to French interests and to British interests, right? And that's the reality. And so, you know, the left talks a great deal, but doesn't do a whole lot of organizing and imposing and strategizing to change the status quo within the United States itself. And I think it's about time that you really take that seriously, that it's a fight for survival, and other people's survival has a lot to do with what you do here.
Yeah, well said, Moise. Dr. Moise St. Louis. I mean, the struggle in order to, if people who want to support liberation in Haiti or support the revolution in Cuba should worry less about telling Haitians or Cubans what to do, and more about taking over and influencing pressure and change on the U.S. state here, if not uprooting that state altogether, or at least parts of it. We're going to go right now to Kira Muliar, who's going to lay out a few, building on Moise's thoughts about ways people can get engaged here in the United States and beyond in political action and support for the solidarity with the Cuban and Haitian people in our sense, not Joe Biden's sense. Vijay, we will hear from Kira, and then we're going to hear a song from Dean Stevens, representative, one of the co-sponsors of this program. Kira, what did you come up with things people can do right now?
Thank you, Joe. We have several websites and actions to share with you all tonight. The first is the Global Health Partners, that's ghpartners.org, who have delivered 6 million syringes to Cuba already to help with vaccine rollout. Our next is Puentes de Amor, or Bridges of Love, a Cuban-American organization working to end the blockade. Ezili Dantor's Lawyers Network at ezilidanto.com. The Haiti Response Coalition, which has just written an important letter to President Biden calling for Haitian solutions for Haiti. I also want to share a list of actions happening this weekend nationwide in solidarity with Cuba. To find the list of actions and to see where one is happening near you, please go to bit.ly/CubaAnswer. Cuba and Answer are case sensitives, and we've shared the link in the chat below. Lastly, this Sunday, the biggest action will be happening at Lafayette Square in DC in front of the White House to welcome Cuban Americans who have walked from Miami to DC, calling to end the blockade. I know that this is a lot, but I look forward to seeing you all this weekend.
Thank you so much for that, Kira. I'm hoping we can make that a regular feature of Shelter in Solidarity going forward. I think we have these deep dive conversations with folks, but a lot of folks want to come out of those conversations. What can I do now? I mean, obviously, there's no quick fix for imperialism and capitalism and global inequality in its history, but I do think thinking concretely about action items is important. So thank you for that, Kira. Music and culture is also important to deepen us, to give us a chance to reflect, to connect in other ways. Dean Stevens, representative of Community Church of Boston, one of the co-sponsors of this program, I believe is ready with a very appropriate song for us. Dean, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Great to see you and hear you.
Hello, folks. Dean Stevens is my name. I am called, what am I called? The administrator and music director of Community Church of Boston. And we are very proud to be co-sponsor and part of these celebrations of radical activism. And thank you, Joe and Seren and all of you for organizing them. I have a tiny little song for you. It's a patriotic song. I've always wanted to learn it for 4th of July and sing it and then tell people that it's written by a Cuban. His name is Silvio Rodriguez, and I've loved his music for 40 years. And this is what it says. I live in a free country which can only be free on this earth in this instant. I am happy because I am a giant. I love a clear woman that I love and who loves me without asking for anything or almost nothing, which is not the same, but really it's the same. And if this were not enough, I have my songs that little by little I grind and remake, biding my time as it suits a man awake. I am happy. I am a happy man, and I ask forgiveness to those who died so I could be happy on this day. Silvio Rodriguez, I like what I've heard about him. They call Bob Dylan the Silvio Rodriguez of the United States, prolific creator of song after amazing song from the country of Cuba. Here's the song. It's called Pequeña Serenata Diurna, which means little daytime song. Vivo en un país libre, cual solamente puede ser libre en esta tierra, en este instante, y soy feliz porque soy gigante. Amo a una mujer clara que amo y me ama sin pedir nada, o casi nada, que no es lo mismo, pero es igual. Y si esto fuera poco, tengo mis cantos que poco a poco muelo y rehago habitando el tiempo, como le cuadra a un hombre despierto. Soy feliz, soy un hombre feliz y quiero que me perdonen por este día los muertos de mi felicidad. Soy feliz, soy un hombre feliz y quiero que me perdonen por este día los muertos de mi felicidad. That's it. Thank you all for being here and for joining us on Shelter in Solidarity and Encuentro Cinco and Community Church of Boston.
Thank you, Dean. It's good to hear some Cuban patriotism spoken from the belly of the beast here. or sung as well as spoken. All right, folks, it's up to you now. We are, well past the hour mark, but here at Shelter in Solidarity, we do make it a point to engage in live, open discussion with those who are attending these events, as well as the guests. And I know we have some very involved and learned people on this call right now, still about 100 folks on this. Many of you have indicated in the chat box, but we would love to get your voices out here. I've seen Mary, I'm tempted to call on you if you're ready, or Victor Wallace, my brother Hananya is out there. Others may, if you indicate with a raised hand, I'd be happy to call on you. I don't want to make it awkward for anyone, but I've seen a lot of really interesting comments. I know their comment about how to understand. There's been some confusion and or some discussion in the chat box about how to understand Jovenel Moise's relationship to elite interests within and outside of the country here. I don't know if anyone would like to give voice to that. I know that Hananya and Mary and others spoke to it in the chat box. Mary, would you like to speak to that? Or Hananya, would you like to give voice to the conversation here?
Sure.
All right,
sure.
Mary, we'll go to you.
I'd love to speak. I'm delighted at this webinar. In fact, we postponed a webinar that I was supposed to give on Cuba because we thought this one was so important. And I'm delighted to see Cuba and Haiti paired, as people have said, as the two most important, in my consideration, revolutions in the Caribbean. I've been going back and forth to Cuba for 50 years, and I have just spent the past 11 out of 18 months there. I want to talk about democracy, though there's so many things to talk about. Somebody pointed out to me recently that the so-called Greek model of democracy was based on a small elite making decisions among themselves while maintaining tens of thousands of slaves. And the so-called French liberal democracy, our model, was again a democracy based on elites, while the country also maintained itself off the labor of thousands of colonies in the Caribbean and Africa. Our model, indeed, of slavery and annihilation. I want to say that in Cuba, there are problems of participation, but there is no lack of democratic institutions. It's one of the most democratic electoral systems I know of. And furthermore, all laws of significance, all of them, are submitted to discussion in communities and work centers and women's organizations and youth organizations around the country, and then considered. Even the Constitution was determined that way. I also want to say another thing is that I've seen videos from Cuba with the police talking about their experiences on July 11th and 12th. And they talk about being bitten by protesters, of their cars being destroyed and gasoline used to set fire to stores. They talk about being afraid of their lives and having their lives threatened. And it reminds me of nothing more than the stories from the Capitol Police during the January 6th terrorist and vandalism attacks. So that's what I want to say, and that I will be giving my seminar on Wednesday, July 28th at 7. But importantly, I noticed that Pambana Bassett is also in this call, and she's actually in Havana and has lived through the last 10 days. And I think it would be important if she would be willing to say something about it.
Sounds great to me. Pambana, I see you there. Can I hear you? I just asked you to unmute. Can you unmute yourself?
Yes.
Great. Pambana, are you willing to? Great. Please give us your perspective from Havana.
Yes, greetings, Pambana, she, her. I'm half of the Cuba team here with Witness for Peace Solidarity Collective. We have the great honor of partnering with the Centro Memorial Martin Luther King here in Havana, just an incredible movement strategy center, popular education, liberation theology. And yes, no, these days have been really difficult days. This presentation that you all have organized made it really clear and contextualized very well just how willing the US is to put hundreds of millions of dollars, incredible, CIA, counterinsurgency, targeting youth, artists, some of our sympathies as people who care about social justice and police brutality, just a total manipulation through what Vijay described as hybrid warfare. to both make life very difficult for Cuban people, to exacerbate existing inequities that the people are working to overcome in these 63 years of revolutionary process, to, throw off neo-colonialism and the dictatorship of capital, and to rebuild their society in one that centers human dignity, participation, subsidized healthcare, free daycare to university, subsidized telecommunications and transportation, incredible solidarity with the global South in particular as we face vaccine apartheid, and just horrific statistics across the world in terms of the loss of life of our communities as working class Black and Brown people. Things are really calm here, but people are also incredibly worried by the intensification of US warfare against the Cuban people, timed specifically to try to undermine their incredible achievements in saving lives during this COVID pandemic and showing internationalism and solidarity and becoming yet again a beacon of light. Cuba is important. We must be unwavering in our defense of the Cuban revolutionary process, especially because of its symbolic importance, but also because of the ways in which they have changed the material conditions of the people here. And we should not separate the Cuban Revolution from the majority African descendant population who have made it what it is and have done so in these 500 years of ongoing resistance to US and European colonization.
Thank you, Pambana. It's great to have a voice from Havana here. I mean, we've been told there isn't internet freedom in Cuba. Here you are, and yet, right? So I mean, that's something maybe we could address. What exactly internet freedom means in a moment where internet is controlled in the ways that it is by U.S. and corporate interests alike. Just putting that out there for someone. But I believe we have Ray G right now. Ray G, ready with a question. Again, we'll take maybe Ray and then maybe one other if there's someone else who would like to speak, and then we could give our panelists another round at it before we maybe take one last round of questions. So please do indicate in the chat box or raise your hand if you'd like to jump in. I know many of you have much to say, but are saying it in the chat box, but we'd love to hear it out loud as well. Ray, are you there?
Yeah. Thank you, Joe. I'm Ray. I've been a listener on and off of Shelter in Solidarity for a little bit now. This is my first time jumping in. I had a question that I think is primarily directed towards Vijay, but if either one of the other panelists can jump in, that would be great. Vijay, the first time he spoke was talking about like some of the tactics used against Cuba, and I remember him mentioning something about external debt. I was wondering if he could, Vijay, I was wondering if you could elaborate a little more on like on the shortage of U.S. dollars in Cuba, and like in the way like external debt is like weaponized against Cuba. If that's something you can speak to.
The first thing, Ray, is that it's a great question you've asked, but I want to say that this is not a Cuba question. About 140 countries in the developing world are struggling right now with an external debt catastrophe, roughly $11 trillion of debt that the developing world just can't service. The bill at the end of this year from these countries is going to be $4 trillion just for debt servicing. Okay, bear in mind the fact that 64 countries last year spent more on servicing debt than they spent on healthcare. Okay, that's the situation we have in the world. That's what capitalism and imperialism are about. They have these countries, formerly colonized countries, whose wealth has been stolen for hundreds of years, now forced to borrow to basically cover their payments. Cuba is not alone here. Cuba is one of tens of countries that are struggling with external debt. So I want to put Cuba in context a little bit. Now, on top of that, there is the US embargo. you have to understand it. Firstly, there's just the regular question of external debt being a problem. A country needs to import things. A country of 11 million people, it's an island. There's a lot of stuff they need to import. Like, for instance, syringes. 60% of the world's syringes are made in India. The company Hindustan Syringes, for instance, one of the largest manufacturers of syringes. Cuba has to import syringes. You have to pay, hard cash for the syringes you import. Now, how are you going to raise that cash if your main source of external funds, namely tourism, has disappeared? How are you going to export the cash? How are you going to get the money to pay for syringes needed in the pandemic? The World Health Organization isn't sending ships with syringes. United States is not even allowing them to conduct basic commerce. The Cuban finance minister, as I said, was in Paris recently trying to renegotiate the debt. Now, tomorrow in the New York Times, I'm glad you had a Silvio Rodriguez song, because tomorrow in the New York Times, there will be a full-page ad called Let Cuba Live. And about 400 people have signed on to this ad. Go to the website Let Cuba Live, including Silvio Rodriguez, including, I really should read out the names of everybody, but if you go to the website Let Cuba Live, yes, thanks, Kira. If you go to the website, you'll see the ad there and a list, and there's a way for you to sign onto this statement, which I think you must. A range of people have signed on to this, film stars like Emma Thompson, like Jane Fonda and others, musicians, including John Densmore, by the way, the most radical drummer in rock and roll from the Doors, and so on, have signed this statement, and Silvio Rodriguez on the top of it. Why? Because we understand that Cuba is on the one side just another developing country, Ray, which is struggling like all the other developing countries against a ruthless IMF-dominated system that doesn't let all these countries live. You see what I'm saying, Ray? There's just a normal problem of developing countries. On top of that, you have these damn sanctions and these 243 coercive measures. And today, the Biden administration has sanctioned the Cuban Ministry of Defense. Let me ask you a question. There's SOS Cuba, right? That fake hashtag out of Miami. When have you ever participated in a SOS USA? 942 human beings were shot brutally to death by US police departments last year. That's 3 people around 2 point something people per day shot by US police departments. Recently, a man was shot in his home by the DeKalb police in Atlanta, near Atlanta. Where is SOS USA? You're so worried about SOS Cuba. Where is the New York Times SOS USA? Where is Washington Post SOS USA? To the credit of the Washington Post, they have kept a record of who's been shot by the police, and the number I quoted is from the Washington Post. But I don't see the Biden administration as seized by this, as seized by the obscenity of police shooting. This is a thing I want to say, Joe, to the left in the United States. There are a couple of people in Cuba who were vandalizing, as far as I am told, on the streets during these protests. One of them was arrested. He was held for a day. Immediately, a series of left-wing people said this Marxist has been arrested. He was released the next day, by the way. He was not killed like any number of African Americans and Afro-Latino people in the United States. He was released the next day. But meanwhile, all these leftists so happy to weaponize themselves on behalf of US imperialism. You should be ashamed of yourselves, frankly.
Yeah, thank you, Vijay, for making that point. I think it deserves to be made sharply. I mean, keeping a sense of context is very difficult for many people, trained in imperialistic ways of thinking. And I think it takes a sharp comment to maybe break people from that, if anything can. We have hands up. I have 2 questions that I believe have been relayed by multiple people in the chat box. So I'm going to read those, and then Julian, I see you with your hand up. We can bring you in, and then I would like to actually, second thought, I'm going to ask these questions to Moise, especially to Moise and Ezili, and then Julian will bring you in as the first of our last round of questions. All right, because I think both of these point a little bit towards Haiti, not to say Vijay can't contribute. So 2 questions. One is, what about the role of the Clintons? I think this was mainly directed towards the historical legacy of the Clintons in Haiti, but of course the Clinton legacy does not limit, unfortunately, is not limited to Haiti alone. The other question, more specifically Haiti, some confusion in the chat box or some discussion as to how we can reconcile two things at one time. How could Moise Jovenel be a puppet of the elite of the United States and yet be taken out by the elite? What is the nature of that contradiction, or how do we reconcile that seeming contradiction? I understand that, you know, Moise and Ezili could probably speak to this. Let's take that combination, the Clintons, and how to understand the differing takes, or the struggle around Moise here with and against the elite, and then we'll go to one last round of questions before we wrap things up. And Julian, you'll be the first when we get there. Okay. Should see. Ezili, would you like to go first, and then Moise on these two questions, the Clintons, and how do we really parse Moise, friend of the elite and yet assassinated by the elite? Question mark.
Okay, so on January 12th, 2010, there was a massive earthquake and 310 people died in 33 seconds. And then the United States brought in Mrs. Clinton. She was Secretary of State. Mr. Clinton was given a job at the UN to collect, for the first time in history. The UN has its own banker, but for the first time in history, because Bill Clinton had already been the same position with the tsunami, he wanted to control all that money coming in from the UN. Money coming in from UN member states. They collected in excess of $13 billion. You see the condition of Haiti. They also collect, and this is not private monies. The Clinton had so many different titles in Haiti. They're the ones that left us with the Men in Pink, this party, political party of Sweet Mickey and Jovenel Moise, who, as everyone understands, were not duly elected. Neither one of them were duly elected. They were put in by Mrs. Clinton doing doing Michel Martelly. He came in, like some people say, third or fifth, but they put him in the runoff, and they actually threatened Préval, who was the president then, with exile if he did not do what Mrs. Clinton said to do. And obviously, you all know that Mrs. Clinton and Bill Clinton used their foundation as a pay-per-play, so that they were able to exploit our resources by putting in a president that they put in. They had groomed through their whole process of NED and charitable stuff. So they took so much money, $13 billion. The only money that went to the Haitian government was the Petro-Caribe money. That was the money directly from Venezuela. And they allowed their puppets to actually abscond with that money, but they were the greater, they absconded with the 13 billion, plus, of course, you all know, there was about 8 billion that was collected in private donations, like, let's say, the Red Cross. And the Red Cross collected something like $500 million, and they built something like 6 houses. But on top of that,
I just want to get this clear for anyone who didn't catch it. $8 billion donated to the Red Cross, supposedly in sympathy and with the people of Haiti after the earthquake, and documented 6 houses built.
I said
around there.
No, okay, so 8 billion was collected altogether by the so-called non-for-profit. The non-for-profit is an $80 billion business. It's the soft tool of empire, but the Red Cross collected $500 million. $500 million.
Okay, well,
yes,
$500 million for 6 houses. That's an expensive
for 6
house.
houses. But
Must be a hell of a house.
Yeah. So when I was trying to make to tell you who that 8 billion. So altogether for the earthquake, the West collected something like $21 billion. And you see, we didn't have clean water because the UN brought us cholera, and that cholera killed between 10 to 30,000 Haitians and made about 1 million sick. And now our water table is poisoned. And what the Clintons thought to do was to give the market women cholera insurance and then give the people, instead of clean water, which is a solution to cholera, they gave vaccines that you had to take every 2 years. And they did not contact trace the UN soldiers. So they just kept killing us and killing us. So there's many, many, many cases. So essentially the Clintons just use their foundation, like most foundations, to fund their own projects in Haiti and take our resources. As a matter of fact, they had Michel Martelly rule by decree, and by decree, he divested Haiti of islands that we owned. Like one of the islands was Ile La Vache, and he essentially said that this will be a tourist zone. Of course, many Haitians died to stop that. And he also did the same thing with Guanaive. Now, with respect to Moise, you have to understand, there is no question. I want to say one thing about Kemas. The white liberals sometimes obstruct they obstruct me in my work. And I've been doing this for 40 years now. As I told you, before Aristide, I was, immigrant child, representing, going to different places to actually translate for Haitians who were fleeing the Cédras and Michel Francois coup d'etat back in 1991. So I've been here for a long time, and I've seen what the white liberals do. What they do is they come in, and instead of going to Washington, as this the panelist was saying, instead of going to Washington and telling Washington to get your knee off of our neck, they come in to speak for us, because that's the racism that, we don't have our own agency. They can come and speak for us. So I want to say that Kim Ive has, what he's saying about a barbecue is incorrect. Barbecue is a former policeman who went awry and has been terrorizing the people. He is not a revolutionary. So I don't know. I want that to be very, very clear. He's not a revolutionary. The gangs and the mercenaries in Haiti are paid for by the oligarchs, some of the politicians, and the U.S. government. And a lot of times they will have white mercenaries put all in black, so you can't see that they're white, and they will be the gang members, or they will be the police shooting demonstrators. You have to understand that. Now, Moise, there is no question that he was not duly elected, right? It was a Digicel election. So, and this is something Americans have to pay attention to, because the laboratory, as we call the CIA and those folks, is that they try it out first in Haiti. Even though first what they do is that they suppress the vote so that the people in the neighborhoods that might not vote for him cannot come to vote. And they're about to do that now with something called carte d'homologue, right? They create these voting cards, or Jovenel Moise's election was run by Digicel. Digicel is a large communication company run by Dennis O'Brien. They make billions of dollars in Haiti by having a monopoly on the phone, and they control where you were going to vote. And if they thought you may not vote for their candidate, they would send you to Cap Haitien when you're supposed to be in Port-au-Prince. They did a lot of things to suppress the vote. So even though he only had supposedly 9% of the vote, most of it was fraudulent. And so that's why the people of Haiti, it's because I want to make clear, because there is a PH2K propaganda going on. His PH2K is his political party. There is a propaganda, and the United States is replacing Jovenel with other PH2K people that it has dossiers on. The reason that they were able to say this is the DEA is because the United States has secret indictments on these people that they use over their heads. And what does that do to the Haitian sovereignty? It means we have no sovereignty. So what Jovenel was trying to do was to have some leverage so he can save his skin. And at the same time, you have to understand, I'll give him perhaps, first of all, he is an assassin, 11 massacres. And I have many, many human rights activists like Marie Antoinette Duclair, who was shot in the head because of his forces 5 days before he died. So let's be very clear. There is nothing about him that the people of Haiti are going to mourn, except those who benefit from his political party.
Okay,
And a lot
Ezili, I want to make sure we are running a little short of time here. Can I bring Moise in on this? I think that you've made some very sharp points there, but I want to go to Moise to get his take on this. I mean, how he understands the contradiction.
may I just
Okay,
finish
okay,
real
just
quick?
wrap it up quickly, and then
I
we'll
will,
go to
I will.
Moise.
So,
Sure.
so essentially, he was put in office by the elite, those families, right? Boulos, Bijou, Merv, they pay for the coup d'etats, they pay for people who will look after their interests, the foreign interests and the interests of the oligarchs, right? But at a certain point in time, when he got into office, okay, when the Petro Caribe money was gone and they no longer had those billions of dollars, he had to maneuver to find money. And the oligarchs have like 25-year contracts to control monopolies. He started going into that, and they were mad at him. And one of the things, for instance, Boulos, a big oligarch, he put an arrest warrant for him. So there was a lot of, he was fighting certain of the oligarchs that had put him in office, and so that's what was going on. And so that's why Moise, a puppet of the elites, ended up fighting the elites because there was no more money, there was no more funds, and he was trying to find a way to keep himself from going to jail.
Yeah, thank you, Ezili. I mean, for a couple of things there. I mean, I think it's very important. Like, thieves can fall out too, right? Gangsters can fall out amongst themselves too. And also, I appreciate you clarifying your view of that Kim Ives issue around, and not just Kim Ives, but the broader issue of this Jimmy Barbecue, who is being labeled by some as a revolutionary leader of the lumpen proletariat. But I've been hearing from others who seem to have more ties on the ground that his gangs are getting funds from the very elite that some people are trying to say they're wanting to overthrow. So I really appreciate you clarifying your position on that. Moise, what would you add to Ezili's take before we take one last round of questions?
So I'll try to be brief. Once the Clinton has played, and you can, if you actually look to WikiLeaks, you'll find the letters from Boulos thanking Clinton for managing the electoral process to bring Martelly to power, right? So that's a documented thing. So the Clinton was very involved in pursuing the interests of the United States to shape the politics of the country and brought Martelly to power, and to try to broker a deal with their Clintons half brother to explore the $21 billion in gold deposits in the country. So the Clintons have it's not by coincidence that Haitians refused to vote. Quite a number of Haitians refused to vote for Hillary Clinton as she was running, because they saw her both as a thief for not using the money after the earthquake to really use that money into the country, but to put that money into her own nonprofit organization. So the Clinton themselves has a pretty dubious involvement in the country. But you have to understand that the Hillary Clinton was also working to preserve the interests of the United States. And she was imposing the will and foreign policy of the United States, right? So you can't just take the person, right? You have to think about the role of Hillary Clinton at the time and the role of Obama to prevent a raise in the minimum wage in Haiti, right? So having said that, I'm going to leave that aside. That part of our challenge is I try not to be sentimentalist about these things. It's about protecting. Americans are trying to protect their interests and impose their will, and they'll do that by any means, and they'll murder for it, and they'll do that to all kind of domination and subterfuge, right? And they'll do that in your name, right? And so I'm gonna just put it like that. Jovenel, I mean, part of our challenge is we have a hard time being nuanced. Right? Human beings are interesting because they have the capacity to change and to see things with a level of clarity that distance sometimes limit. Yeah, it is true that Jovenel came to power supported by the elites and not necessarily by a greater cross-section of the population. It is also true that he was gaining popularity within the population by what he was promising to do for the population. And part of the way in which he was prevented from doing that was because of the elite control the resources of the nation and would not give him the opportunity to implement some of those policies he wanted to implement. And so he turned against them because he saw the imposition of the elites and the way in which they dominate the resources of the state limit his capacity to really do something for the people that he really wanted to do. And so Jovenel, people are can be both things at the same time. And so Jovenel found himself standing against the very people that brought him to power and that supported him. And that made him a target for propaganda, a target to make the country ungovernable, because he was changing the rule of the game. He was canceling contracts in the millions of dollars that the elites controlled indefinitely without producing the very things that they had the contract to produce. And so he was also trying to change the direction of the country and make it less dependent on the United States by lessening American influence and bringing in other countries and establishing contact with the Russians and trying to find a middle path for a country that has been captured. And there is a cost to resisting the status quo. And one of the costs, and we in the left always fall prey to that, we believe in the propagandas, right? And we believe what the news tell us, and we believe in those propagandas. And sometimes those propagandas help us support foreign policies that is against our values, right? And so Jovenel found his death because he saw that he needed to take a stand to do something for the nation. And you cannot do that in a state that is captured without a cost, and the cost was his death. Now you can malign him for all kinds of reasons, but as a leader of a country, you are faced with the realities of the country. And if you're someone who's building a conscience, you can make decisions to try to change the status quo of the country, or you can maintain it as is. And he tried to change the status quo in the country, right? And so I think in many ways we have to be nuanced, right? Yeah. Everybody's not all evil. Everybody's not killing everybody. Some people were unaware, and that awareness gives them a different way of looking at things and maybe a ways of acting to that awareness to change things, right? And so I think we have to be measured in the way in which we think about the politics of the nation and the United States. And I'll end by saying this, and I'll be very brief. We should be as determined to support Cuba's attempt to maintain its self-determination and Venezuela's attempt to create a system that is responsive to its population, as we should be willing to defend the Haitians' fight for self-determination. And we should see through these propagandas that really create mirages and clouds of judgment in our analysis.
Yeah, Moise, thank you for that. I mean, there is the basis for a longer conversation here. We are starting to come to the end of this one. Although we will take one more round of questions and comments. I think we have at least 3 ready to go. And then we'll ask each of our guest speakers to speak for maybe for 2 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes to wrap things up. And then we'll thank our sponsors and and wrap up for the evening. But I do want to say that no, I think, I mean, you make a very important point about, I mean, it's certainly a point that resonates for me. And I think about the 2004 coup, right? When Aristide was pushed, ultimately like absconded by U.S. U.S. personnel, right? Military personnel. But that lead up to that coup, there were a lot of groups at that time in the United States, right, who were amplifying in the name of democracy or social justice or even socialism, I think, right? Amplifying the idea that Aristide was so corrupt, it would be a good thing if he was overthrown, right? And that turned out to be, I think, I think as Peter Hallward's book, Damming the Flood, I think documents really, really well. That's Damming the Flood. That seems to echo with your point. I think the question about Moise, I think, is worth further discussion. I think we're going to learn more, aren't we? I mean, it clearly wasn't just a random person taking a shot at his house. I mean, it was a very well-funded, as I think Ezili pointed out earlier, very well-funded, supported international apparatus, which once again somehow seems to go through Miami. I wonder, Miami seems to be a greater source of terrorist sponsorship than Afghanistan ever was. Just to make a little point before we bring in our three questions here, maybe one good thing about global warming, I won't finish the sentence, but no, I don't mean that either. But I mean, it just seems to be, we need to trace out these plots. I mean, there's no substitute for investigation on the ground. And I do think Ezili made a good point, which is that sometimes, leftist commentary in the United States doesn't have that ground research, right? And yet kind of tells us who the good guys and the bad guys are. And we need to find ways, and I don't have the answer to this, but I think this show hopes to make some humble contribution to helping us have more investigation connected to people that are on the ground or know people on the ground of these struggles. Otherwise, it's very difficult to sift through, right? What is propaganda and what is not? It's a real challenge, I think, for us, especially in the belly of the beast. We have a lot of bad acid to contend with. We're going to go to Julian, John, and then back to our comrade in Havana for a final word as we wrap this up, and then just 2 minutes from each of our final speakers. Julian, are you there?
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. Firstly, thanks to all the presenters, distinguished speakers. If I may say a few things, I shared them on the chat. And, I think it's really kind of amazing. And this includes the so-called left here in the empire, about how distorted reality becomes. Because we just don't realize how the problem is rooted right here. We live in an empire. We also live in a settler colonial state, a state that's built on genocide of the Indians, of the Africans, of the Mexicans, of the people of color. If you look at the history in this country, of course, we have no history in schools of relevance because it's all colonialist, it's Eurocentric. In this continent, 125 million indigenous people were annihilated. I mean, Haiti is an indigenous name, entire nations of the Caribs, Arawaks, Tainos were annihilated in the Caribbean. And people just don't realize, talk about police brutality. 3,000 Black people were killed in Brazil from January, through April 2021, 3,000. We don't read about Brazil, So there's a fundamental disconnect, and it goes back to the history. This country, Turtle Island, what we call North America, so 85% of the people massacred within 100 years of the European colonial invasion. Now, the legacy of racism and of militarism. Walden Bellow has written a very good article in Common Dreams.
Julian, this is really important stuff, but do you have a question? I just want to, I agree with everything you're saying, but I just want to make sure that you are coming to a point.
Well, I think it's just so important when we're looking at both Haiti and Cuba, okay, to look at the racism that's projected from here. When people say, look, there's anti-Black racism in Cuba. I've been in Cuba and in Haiti. And there's one thing that people from here have problems with. They tend to project their own experiences on people. Cuba has a 96% literacy rate, okay? I was with Black people in Cuba, medical doctors, professors, and so on. And one thing that they reminded me, they said it's a struggle. You can see we don't have enough food, but all of us have housing, we have shelter, we have clothes, we have free medical care, and most importantly, Cuba is our love. We love Cuba. The revolution is ours. We're an independent country. We suffer. So this is really important for people to understand from here, including the left.
Yeah, thank you,
The
Julian.
kind of assumptions we make. And so the question is, how do we begin to unlearn this imperialist settler colonial mentality that sees Cuba and Haiti, especially, which has so much to do with the Louisiana Purchase and slavery. You know, Black people in this country wouldn't be free at all, quote, emancipated, if it wasn't for Haiti. You know, yet Haiti is only mentioned when there is the earthquake, or there is now, everybody's talking about Haiti, you know,
Yeah,
because of the military coup. So the question is, how do we integrate issues of Cuba and Haiti into the so-called mainstream of the left discussions?
Okay, great question. And I'm gonna stop you there, Julian, but because I think that's a great question. And one thing I want to say is that maybe in addition to adding Juneteenth to our, you know, welcome day, federally supported days off, we could add make January 1st, popularize the fact it's Haitian Independence Day too, right? The first day, you know, we could all eat some soup jamu, you know, pumpkin soup, the great liberatory symbol of Haitian independence, where the delicacies of the rich were finally allowed to be eaten by all the people of Haiti. I mean, there's all kinds of ways. I think this is a question we all need to be thinking of. There's not one way, but how can we integrate in living, lively, inspiring ways the traditions and histories of these places that are only, I mean, less than 100 miles from the United States in some cases, right? I mean, closer than so many other places. Closer, you know, to the tip of Florida than we are here in Massachusetts to Chicago. You know, why don't we, you know, integrate some of these traditions and consciousness into our daily life, as well as our classrooms and you know, all the different ways teaching happens, for better or for worse. Thank you for that, Julian. Let's go to John Lawrence, and then we will go back for a final comment from Havana to Pabana. John.
Yes, I was wondering, what would be the economic and political consequences if the United States stopped opposing self-determination in countries like Cuba and Haiti? Why is the elite just so dead set against self-determination for countries such as these?
Thank you, John. A great question. Pambana, and then we'll go back to our panel for one last.
Yes, just greetings from Havana. So excited that people are meeting and discussing and connecting these two revolutionary processes and all their poetics and justice. Certainly for those in the belly of the beast, we need to do, we all need to do much more work to really commit ourselves fearlessly to principled and concrete solidarity with popular and revolutionary processes of the global South. They have the answers, the solutions always emerge from them. And the US remains the greatest threat to peace and to planetary well-being, with its 800 military bases, with its hybrid war, with its sanctions, with its coups, with its massacres, you know, targeted against these processes. Movimiento al Socialismo, the Bolivarian Revolution, the Zapatistas, who also celebrate the same first day of their uprising. And, you know, when we look to Cuba and Haiti, both the Haitian Revolution and in 1994, what the people set out to do in their processes, it's beautiful. I mean, I walk around in my neighborhood here in Cerro, and there are clinics, there are public phones, there are elder people's homes, there are places where you can get subsidized food on your ration card, bread, vegetables that are trucked in with Venezuela oil. There's just an incredible amount of working class solidarity that we all know exists in the global South and even in working communities in the US, but to see the state and structural support of it It cannot be paralleled. We must defend its right to exist. It's the people's right to create clinics, to rewrite their constitution so that they're not written by slave owners, of land reforms so that we end ecocide and plantations and cruelty to the earth, that we challenge privatization, neoliberalism, which throughout this year of the pandemic, we know equals death and destruction. And, here I get on the bus and there's students from all over the world. We must end this thought that Cuba, that Haiti, that Venezuela, that these revolutionary processes are isolated. They are revolutions that when they declare themselves internationalist and Black and Africanist in their praxis. They, helped Greece in their independence. Simón Bolívar with the debt yet to be paid. On the bus, I see people who are, young people studying from Palestine, from Nicaragua, from the Congo, just an incredible number of people, most of them Black people who are studying here so that they can go home and build up their public health systems. And so we must lift up the Haitian Revolution, which came 150 years before the Cuban Revolution, both of them, people freeing themselves and, providing an incredible threat to the powerful, genocidal, slaving empire that is the United States. So commit, study your history, join actions. We need to be really serious and unequivocal because this has been a bipartisan assault on these dignified peoples.
Thank you, Pambana. Pambana Bassett with us from Cuba, from Havana, as I understand it. Thank you, Pambana. Solidarity to you there. I think you make a really important point. It also highlights one thing we can all be doing, and I think we need another community meeting or many community meetings to do it effectively. How do we target this embargo in a real political way? I mean, strategically within the context of the U.S. state and beyond it, and also the travel restrictions, as you point out, right? As long as a place like Cuba exists, it continues to educate and inspire people around the world. And I've known a number of people, I have not gone to Cuba myself, but everyone I know who's been to Cuba has come back inspired and informed and more committed, not just to Cuba solidarity, but to changing the world in a radical way and knowing that it can be done, even in great adverse conditions. And I think that's something that even those of us who are on the left often struggle with. How can we believe that it really can be done, when we haven't seen it in our lifetime where we live? And Cuba isn't far from where we live. And we really need to, I think, get together any way we can to put pressure on elected and unelected, quote unquote, representatives to tear down this embargo, to lift these restrictions, these coercive acts that have been put on Cuba. Okay, there's a lot on the table here from Pabana, from Julian, from John, and from others in the chat box. Vijay, we're going to go to you, and then Ezili, and finally to Moise, and then we're going to thank our sponsors and wrap up this over 2-hour conversation. Tribute to the importance of the event. We still have over 70 people here with us on Zoom. Vijay, you get the first of the last word.
Well, the first thing I want to say, Joe, is great to be here. Nice to see lots of people that I know. Mary, I know David Paul, last seen together with him in Caracas, Venezuela. Nice to see you again. Listen, friends, let's not romanticize any place on the planet. Okay, Cuba is a country of 11 million human beings. You're going to find things you don't like. You're going to meet somebody, Pambana is right. They're lovely people on the bus. There may be somebody horrible on the bus because, they're human beings. They're not Jedi Knights. Venezuela is a country that's experimenting with socialism. Take it easy. You can't judge places against utopia. Judge them against where they came from, which is wretchedness. Wretchedness. You can't judge these places against utopia. I find people's impatience to be more annoying than their disdain. Don't be impatient with a country, a poor country, a desperately poor developing country trying to build productive forces in order to establish socialism. Look, if there was a revolution in the United States where the productive forces are fairly advanced, or in Germany, or in the United Kingdom, or in Canada, where 60% of the world's mining companies are domiciled, you would have a much different path to socialism than all the actual countries that attempted socialism, like the Russian Empire, wretched, poor country, like China, like Vietnam, like Burkina Faso, whose great leader was assassinated in 1987, Thomas Sankara, like Cuba. These are wretchedly poor places trying to build socialism. Take it easy. have some bloody distance from that and understand with compassion that these are human beings trying to create something better on the earth. I get frustrated with the level of sharp criticism that comes from liberals against these experiments. You know, the hatred towards Nicolas Maduro, a bus driver who has now got the audacity to be the president of Venezuela. The hatred towards Miguel Diaz-Canel, a man who's called a bureaucrat. A bureaucrat? Seriously? This bureaucrat got into his car in Havana and drove to San Antonio de los Baños to meet people. Bureaucrats don't leave their offices, comrades. They do not leave their offices. Great hatred towards the leaders of these processes, towards Prime Minister Nguyen in Vietnam. So casually people say, well, Vietnam, they are now a capitalist society. Remember that it was American napalm and Agent Orange and bombs that destroyed agriculture in that country, and yet they try their best to develop a socialist road. Every time I'm in Vietnam, people cry and say, for generations, our land will remain destroyed. We still have children born with spinal dislocations and so on, thanks to the chemical weapons dropped by the United States. Yet casually people say, it's not a socialist country, they are now capitalists. Thanks a lot for your opinions. If you don't have compassion for people trying to make a better world, you've lost your mind.
Thank you, Vijay. Really, really well said. Ezili, final words?
I think the world is abundant, and I don't know this mindset that the white settlers and the former slaveholders have. It's not human. They put profit before people, and they will do whatever it takes. I think one of the things that people living in those nations that I just told you about, the nine core group enemies of Haiti, can do is go to your representatives. I mean, you're supposed to have democracy. Is this in your name? This is what the United States is doing in your name. It's hiring mercenaries to go and use sniper fire to kill unarmed protesters. And that's what they did under Jovenel Moise. I also want to make very clear that I work on the ground, and I've been doing this for decades and decades and decades. If somebody knows who Jovenel Moise is, it would be me. And let me tell you, there is no nuance on him being a criminal. He was a criminal. The only thing, it's really important to understand that, because like I said, 12 to 16,000 market women's houses were just burnt down under his rule. They're victims of Jovenel Moise. They're victims of the core group. Jovenel Moise came in illegally. He knew he came in illegally. He knew they could use the dossier they had against him, against our people. At a certain point in time, like I said, when the Petro-Caribe money, because as you know, when Trump came in, Trump brought Jovenel and a whole bunch of other rest avec house Negroes to go after Guaido and not recognize Maduro, but this unelected Guaido. That's what Jovenel did. And it was a traditional relationship that Haiti have always had with Venezuela that he tried to destroy. At the last minute, this man, like I said, a month before he died, remember, he was already illegal. He shouldn't have been in office. His term ended February 7th, 2021. So this was an illegal person running as a dictator for since January 2020. He dissolved parliament. He put in prison Supreme Court justices. He fired Supreme Court justices that he didn't have any business, he could not do. He brought the age of consent for sex in a country that has other priorities down for the pedophiles that come to Haiti. He did things that were so amazingly indecent that for anyone to say that somehow and romanticize the fact that he also at the end, like I said, the United States always used that secret indictment over his head. And he was looking for a way out for himself, not for our nation, because at the same time as he was going to Russia, allowing Russia to come into Haiti, and these nations are doing their own things, right? Venezuela, right, knew that Maduro knew that Jovenel had supported Guaido, but for their own reasons. Remember, we are just a pawn. Haiti gets sold for the United States getting out of Georgia or Belarus or some other place in the East. We are alone, Haitian. I'm speaking to Haitian, my people right now. We are alone. There's no one coming to save us. There's no white liberal coming to save us. There's no one coming to save us. But let me tell you this, because we are spiritual people, it was our spiritual connection to the biosphere that allow us to get rid of enslavement. We may not be able to see the road, but I'm telling you, the United States is a falling power. It's no longer that one power that it was in the 1990s. Russia and China are coming on its heel. At the same time, because of who we are and what we are, we know that what we stand for is for people to come before profit. We die for it. I will die for it. Every Haitian who fights will die for it. But we will never recognize any of these PhD people that the United States puts in office as anything other than house Negroes.
All right, Ezili, very forcefully put. Thank you very much. I think we can all, I mean, I hope that everyone on this call can unite with that broad call for a world that puts people before profit. And it's a simple concept, but in order to make it real, we really need to change so much, and here in the United States more than perhaps anywhere else on earth. Final words to you, Dr. Moise.
Yeah, well, I like Vijay's point that you can't judge countries against utopia, but against the wretchedness it came from. And I'll add to that to say that, or against the wretchedness it is trying or fighting to overcome, right? And that we have to be measured. And we have to be measured to the point of understanding that while we criticize imperialism and the settler colony and the settler society, we are within it, right? And we are benefiting from its institutions and thereby helping to reproduce it and maintain it. Our hands are not clean, right? And so the struggle we are engaging is a struggle for self-evaluation as well as deconstruction. That we cannot find ourselves in a position of externalizing that which is embedded in our daily functioning. To do so would be dishonest. And that is what makes our work so challenging and make changing the system as it operates so challenging.
Yeah.
Right. And so I want us to think about that. And I want us to think about what is it that we do in our neighborhood to change the paradigm and create awareness. And what is it that we do in our communities and with our friends to deepen our understanding of how power functions so we can really shift the orientation of power, right? Because if we can't do that, then we really engage in a discursive experience and exercise. And there isn't a foundational way of shifting the way in which we are operating and living. That the Haitians and the Cubans and the Venezuelans and all of the people who are looking for self-determination is in losing lives for self-determination.
Mm-hmm.
Are we relying upon us who are living easily because of their domination? Are we relying upon us to shift, to gain some clarity and shift the orientation of the space we are in?
Mm-hmm.
And so our hands are not clean. We can't just sit and intellectualize. We have to problematize the fact that we are complicit in a system that operates against our will, that embeds us against our will, that needs us to continue to function as if things were okay and fine. And that kind of invisibility, that easy moving and functioning of the system are killing people. They're killing Haitians. They're killing Cubans who are suffering. They're killing Venezuelans, and they're killing a lot of people around the globe. So the question for us is not an easy one. Right? The question for us is, what do we do and how do we do it? And can we do it? And what do we need to do in order to be successful in changing the cost of our ease?
Thank you,
I will
Moise.
leave it at that.
Thank you, Moise. Powerful words. Reminder that revolution and social change is not just out there. It's not just about, you know, policies and histories out there and violence, but also about the values and the practices and the institutions that structure our lives, or that try to structure our lives, in particular in an imperialist country like the United States. We have a lot of work to do, external and internal. And I think, at least my belief, I don't speak for anyone but myself here, is that it's not one and then the other, but both can be done together. And in liberating the world, we can liberate ourselves, right? And realize the ways in which the system chains us, even if we might be in a quote unquote more privileged part of it, that the system, to some degree, all people who care about other human beings and want a decent, sustainable world of peace and justice are being, in some, at least metaphorical sense, constrained and chained by the system, even if others are bearing the worst brunt. And I think we can liberate ourselves by helping to liberate and helping to struggle in solidarity. I don't want to say liberate like it's some savior thing. Struggle in solidarity with the people on the front lines. Thank you. I mean, I'm just so really happy that so many of you stayed for this. Now it's almost a 2.5-hour conversation. I'm particularly grateful to our guests who signed up for 90 minutes, but gave us 2.5 hours. To Vijay, Prashad, you know, please, a virtual hand to Vijay. Show some love, folks. You know, break down the Google boxes here, the Zoom boxes. To Ezili, Dantor, to Dr. Moise, St. Louis, to all those of you who are here, who shared comments and thoughts and resources in the chat box, who asked questions aloud bravely in this Zoom space, in this age of surveillance. One other thing we have to shed, and also special thanks to our sponsors for this particular program, which is an expanded list. We had Mass Peace Action, Community Church of Boston, the July 26 Coalition, as well as Encuentro Cinco, Socialism and Democracy, and Hardball Press, as well as the Liberty Tree Foundation, all sponsoring this program. Shelter and Solidarity. You can find us at shelterandsolidarity.org. We have, I believe now, over 50 programs that we have, our all-volunteer team has produced, often weekly, bi-weekly. Now we're on a monthly schedule going back to when the pandemic started, at least hit here in Boston in March and April of last year. You can go to shelterandsolidarity.org. Please subscribe, share the content. We think we've been offering things that can help to build the kind of culture that we need to build the community that can make this change. I want to thank my co-producers, Kira Mudliar, Seren Mudliar, Linda Liu, Rachel Yaroshish Patton, and Mark Soderstrom, as well as Tim Sheard, for their ongoing behind-the-scenes contributions to this. That's all we have for you folks. Stay tuned. Check out our Facebook page, our website. We're going to have an August show for you, but we're still working on it. Summer being summer. I hope you're enjoying yours as much as you can while integrating this crucial mission into it. Thank you all for being here. See you next time.
Thank you.